All right, guys, so the webinar is being recorded, and today we're going to look at a quick little supplement strategy using pivots on MT4. Now, I have lost the pivots for my monthly charts. I don't know where to get them. If anybody has them, send it out. But I have pivots for hourly charts that works perfectly on the 1 hour chart on MT4. I'll send that to everybody that's on the webinar after we're done. Now, so let's get into it right away. Now, before we get into this, right, can everybody see the whiteboard? Can everybody see this X that I just drew? Can everybody see this? Whatever the hell I just drew? Okay, awesome. So before we get into the pivot strategy, an exhaustion candle, now I know a lot of you call it a hammer, a pin bar, all these different names that the industry likes to use to confuse everybody. I'm simply going to call it an exhaustion candle. An exhaustion candle is basically any candle that is 70 to 80% wick and 20 to 30% body. So if it's pressure from sellers, something like this, and this is red, this is a seller exhaustion candle. This shows pressure from sellers. Something like this. This is blue, this is green in color. So this is sellers, and this is buyers. That's your simple exhaustion candles. Now you can use whatever terms you like. I'm going to keep it simple. I'm going to call it an exhaustion candle. This simply shows us there's pressure from sellers, and if the body is red, that's a perfect, like the book example of an exhaustion candle. Yeah, if there's like a really small wick at the bottom of the body, that's acceptable too. But if it ends up being like this is not acceptable. Now this is simply an indecision, or a lot of you probably call it a doji. Same thing with the buyers. If there's a little pip, a little wick, that's acceptable. But if it's big, or if the body is like this and candles like this, that's not acceptable either. The body has to be 20-30% compared to the wick if you take the whole candle. Does that make sense to everybody so far? If yes, just type out yes on the chat, please. Does this thing of exhaustion candle make sense to everybody? Vlad and Lou are saying yes. Emeka says yes. Awesome. Now that we know what's the exhaustion candle and what we're working with, let's get straight into the strategy. It's a little quick thing, nothing complicated, just a few guaranteed tips. All right. Now, can everybody still see the screen? I guess yes. All right. So now, your pivots are basically your levels that are being respected every day. Pivots are simply support and resistance that is being respected every day. Different support and resistance levels. And whenever you use pivots, it is important to look at pivots for 3 days. Now you see this, like if this was the live market, this level is for today. Resistance, support, and this is the present level that's being respected. This is the previous day, this is the day before. You must look at least 3 days worth of data when you're using pivots. So pivots are simply your daily support and resistance that is being drawn by the indicator for you. So you don't have to draw it. Pivots are really important. As you can see, the price has been holding between the levels, so pivots are being respected. But I still suggest you still draw your major support and resistance. I'm sure everybody's familiar with that. Everybody's watched the webinar on Facebook. So it is important to draw your own major support and resistance, but you have your daily levels that are drawn for you through pivots. If I zoom out here, you can see that's your daily levels. Resistance 1, resistance 2, resistance 3, support 1, support 2, support 3, and this is the present. Does that make sense to everybody so far? That what pivots are? All right, everybody's caught up now. Now that we know what pivots are and we know what exhaustion candles are, those two things we have down now. So, getting into it. So, can everybody see this beautiful exhaustion candle here? Right here? Isn't that a beautiful, now see, why the candle before it is not an exhaustion? Because the body is not really considerable compared to the wick, right? But you see this one is a beautiful textbook example, right? 20% body, 80% tail of the whole candle, and it's red, which means pressure from the sellers, right? Makes sense? So now, strategy is really simple. Whenever you have an exhaustion candle that's bouncing off of a pivot line, in this case, you see it's bouncing off of this pivot line. Whenever you have an exhaustion candle bouncing off a pivot line, like this, in this case, it's a selling, it's bouncing off of this, you can simply hit sell at the open of the next candle. Right at the open of the next candle, you can enter the sell. Stop loss just above the tail of the exhaustion candle. We're not trying to risk too much. This is not something for longer moves. This is simply, this can almost qualify as a scalp. It's simply a scalp. Stop loss right there, enter sell at the next candle. Your first target, which is guaranteed, is it's bouncing off of this pivot. So whichever pivot line is the closest to this, that's your first guaranteed take profit within the 3-day range, that is. So you see in this one, that's previous day, today, yesterday. So that's the 3 range. The closest pivot line to that is this one, right? Enter sell, 16 pips guaranteed. That's your first take profit. After that, you want to let it run, that's up to you. This is your simple, guaranteed 16 pip profit. Does that make sense to everybody? It's nothing complicated, just a little quick scalping strategy using pivots. This is your guaranteed pips. We are going to do more examples, but is that clear to everybody? Guys, type it out, please, so I know that I'm not just talking to myself. Manny says yes. Lo says yes. iPhone, I'm guessing, is Miguel. Awesome, awesome. Yeah, it's easy. Nothing complicated. Nothing complicated. Exhaustion candle, stop loss right there. It's bouncing off a pivot. That's your confirmation to enter. Enter sell at the next candle. That's your first target. First closest pivot line is your guaranteed profit. In this case, 16 pips. Now, let's do another example. Now, everybody tell me this. Everybody answer this one. This candle right here. Is this an exhaustion candle or not? Emeka, you're saying the candle occurred a day before the current pivot was formed. Emeka, in that case, if you were looking at this, then your closest line would have been this pivot, 15 pips. If you're looking at it this way, when we entered through this candle, 1, 2, 3, your closest line is this one. You entered there, you still got 14 pips. Make sense? Now, Vlad is saying this is not an exhaustion. That's correct. Miguel is saying that is an exhaustion. No, Miguel, it's not. Because see, the body and the wick, they're almost equal. The tail has to be bigger. 70, 80, or 90% tail, 10, 20, or 30% body. That's when that's an exhaustion. Now, Vlad is saying this next one is an exhaustion. Now, Vlad, this simply shows us there is pressure from sellers, but the body is green. So no, it's not a perfect exhaustion. This simply shows us there's pressure coming from sellers, but no, it's not an exhaustion. If the body was red, it would be a perfect exhaustion. Or if the body was on top, the tail was at the bottom similarly, then it would be a perfect buying exhaustion. Make sense? Everybody clear on that? All right. Now, let's do another example. Now everybody tell me this. Is this an exhaustion? Is this an exhaustion candle? This one right here. Emeka, tail doesn't have to touch the pivot. It's no requirement like that. But as long as you have it bouncing off of a pivot line, that's your confirmation for entry. I'll show you in this example again, but tell me, if this is this an exhaustion, the candle that I just marked? Vlad is saying yes. Anybody else? Is this an exhaustion? Come on, guys, type it out. Come on, let's make it interactive. Lo says yes. Emeka says yes. Miguel says yes. Nick says yes. Awesome. So that is an exhaustion. Now, we have an exhaustion. Now, second thing we need to look, is it bouncing off of a pivot line? Now, let's say we were at the live market. So we need to look at three pivots, 3 days worth of pivots. 1, 2, 3. Now, in this case, yes, this is an exhaustion, but if I simply extend this pivot, isn't it bouncing off of a pivot? The body, isn't it bouncing off of a pivot? Doesn't that give you a beautiful scenario to enter? So when, Emeka, does that clear your query? You see how tail touched this pivot, but the body is bouncing off of this pivot. That's what matters to us. That's our confirmation for the entry. I've had 99% success with this little strategy for scalping. So it's almost guaranteed pips for everyone. So you see this? It's bouncing off of this pivot line if I extend this. So you simply enter at the next candle, you sell at the next candle, your stop loss just above the wick of the exhaustion candle. We don't want to risk too much in this. We enter there. Now, it's bouncing off of this pivot. So what's the closest pivot to this within the 3 days? In this case, closest is this, that's 21 pips. It hits that within the same candle, actually, it hits that. Your second target is the next closest pivot, which is 43 pips. Third, 45 pips. It hits all three. And that's your simple scalping strategy. Does that make sense to everyone? So you enter at the next candle. Your guaranteed profit is the first pivot line. In this case, 18 pips. After that, Maybe you can take partial profits, move stop loss down, let the other half run, or after that, it's all up to you. But your first pivot is your guaranteed profit. In this case, if you let it run, it actually hit all three. So you would have got 41 pips from this scalp. That makes sense to everybody? All right, let's do another example. Any questions so far? Any questions, guys, before we do another example? Yes, Nick, this is being recorded, and Vlad, yes, this is just a supplement. Don't base your whole trading just on this. This is just a little scalping supplement for everybody. All right, let's move on. No, before I move on, tell me this. Is this an exhaustion? This candle that I just marked, is that an exhaustion? Nick says yes, Amika says yes, Khan says yes, Vlad says no. In this case, everyone is wrong, Vlad is correct. That is not an exhaustion. There's tail at the top too, and the body. So that's not an exhaustion. No. If the tail at the top or the wick at the top was really small or didn't exist, it would be a beautiful exhaustion bouncing off of this pivot. But the tail is too big, so this is simply an indecision candle with a little bias towards sellers. So no, this is not an exhaustion. Make sense to everyone? Amika gets it? No, cool. All right, let's do another example. Let's go to another pair. Oh, look at that. That's the present day pivot, like when the market closed. That's a beautiful exhaustion. Right when the market opens, you guys can sell right here. Right when the market opens, you can sell at the next candle. That's your guaranteed 18 pips right there. Right there. Right when the market opens. 1, 2, 3 days of pivots. Right when the market opens, that's your guaranteed profit right there. Look at that. There we go. 18 pips. But when the market opens and the new pivots appear, let's say the new pivot appears here, then that's going to be your guaranteed profit, 14 pips. Just give an example. But if the new pivot is below this, then that's your guaranteed profit right there. But let's do another example. Let us find another example. Let's see what we can find. I don't see anything. Let's see AU. Look at this. Now, before we do this, everybody tell me, is this an exhaustion candle? Nick, this works only on 1 hour because the pivots I have are for 1 hour. So I'm not sure if it's going to work on other time frames or not. But these 1 hour pivots, yeah, sorry, I actually lost my other pivots. I only have it for 1 hour. I'll send this to everyone that's on the webinar after we're done. All right, is this a Is this an exhaustion candle? Everyone, come on. Nick says yes. Anybody else? Come on. Low says yes. Okay, that is an exhaustion candle. Now, what's the next thing we want to check? Next thing we want to check is it bouncing off of a pivot line? If this was a live market, it would look like this, right? So if we extend this pivot, it is bouncing off of that, right? So you enter long at the next candle. The closest one from which it's bouncing off is this pivot right here, actually. So you enter at the next candle. That's only 6 pips, kind of useless. I wouldn't bother with this trade. But you guys get the idea. It was only 6 pips. It's sort of a useless trade. Let's find something else. What? Han, what are you talking about? Right. Now, you see, we have another exhaustion here. So if this was live market, it would appear like this. Now, we see we have this exhaustion here. The body's green. The tail on top is almost negligible. So this is a proper exhaustion. Now, we need to check. Is it bouncing off of any pivot within 3 days? So it is bouncing off of this. So at the next candle, we enter. And your first target would be, since we're entering here, so closest to this within 3 days. Right there, 32 pips. That's your first take profit. You put your take profit there, pending just below the tail. Stop loss just below the wick. And look at that. That was your take profit. And 32 pips, easy. Make sense? Does that make sense to everybody? Awesome, awesome. All right, the meeting's about to be ending. Let's do another example and we will call this a day. All right, let's do one more example. Ah, look at that. That's a beautiful exhaustion right there. Right? Now, we need to see within 3 days, is it bouncing off of any pivot? It's bouncing off of this pivot, right? It's bouncing off of this pivot, which means at the open of the next candle, you can enter. And from where you enter, what's the closest pivot within 3 days? That would have been this one. So that's 10 pips right there. If you let it run longer after the new day's pivots appeared, you would have caught 39 pips. And stop loss would be just above the wick. Does that make sense to everyone? We have 5 minutes left in this webinar. So any questions? Anything that is not clear? Or do you guys want to do another example? Let's hear it. That clear to everyone? Nick says just another example. Anyone else? Any questions? Is it clear to everyone? Amika says yes. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's do one more example and then we'll finish the webinar. Let's check on NU. Now see here, if this body was red, this would have been a perfect exhaustion for us to sell, but it's not. Let's look for another exhaustion candle. Same thing here. If this body was red, this would have been a perfect exhaustion for us to sell. Don't even have pivots that far. So check on something else. Let's check here. But yeah, this GU, that's totally a scalp. When the market opens, you guys can take this. Because so far from the pivots from here, if you enter at the open, you can take 18 pips for sure. Yeah, okay. That's an example right here. So that's an exhaustion. Now we need to check, is it bouncing off a pivot? So that's 3 pivots, and yes, it is bouncing off of this one. So at the open of the next candle, which is here, you enter short. The closest pivot is within those 3 days would have been that one. That's 17 pips. So your take profit would have been here. And it was actually hit within the hour, 17 pips right there, within on the same candle that you entered. And that was your guaranteed 17 pips. Nick, does that make it clear? Awesome. So it's just a little strategy using pivots. I'll throw the pivots in the group, so whatever needs it, feel free. Any questions from anyone? Was this helpful? Was it worth your time? I hope so. Any questions before we finish? We have about 3 minutes left, so let's hear it. No questions? Emeka is good. Vlad is good. Gene, no question. All right. Well, thank you for joining, and this will be on Facebook. And I'll see you guys all in the chat. Have a good rest of the day.